Hello there, welcome to the Football Bloc. My name is Brandon. Today I'm going to give you my predictions for the semifinals of the 2023 Asian Cup. So if that sounds interesting, let's hop right into it.
One step beyond.
So the semifinals are finally here. We have 4 teams left. Only 2 of them will go to the final. So I'm going to go through each game. I'm going to give you an analysis of each team's journey up until this point. I'm going to talk about how the teams match up against each other. And of course, I'm going to give you a match prediction for both of them. So the first game we're going to look at here, we have Jordan going up against South Korea. A really interesting matchup. South Korea, of course, one of the best teams in Asia. They have one of the most talented squads in Asia. And they have Hung Sung-min, who I think is probably the best player in this whole tournament. One of the best players in the Premier League, one of the best players in the world in general. So there's no surprise that South Korea make it this far in the tournament. Jordan, on the other hand, is a huge surprise. Jordan, of course, is one of, I would say, the mid-tier, maybe upper mid-tier in terms of Asian football. But no one thought that they would make it this far. If you look at their team overall, they're a very, very dangerous team going forward. The amount of goals that they've scored, and also not just the goals that they scored, but just how, well put together their attack is. If you look at the way that they played against Malaysia, they dropped 4 goals on Malaysia. They were winning against South Korea. Interestingly enough, they were drawn in the same group with South Korea, and we'll get more into that game specifically between Jordan and South Korea when we look at these 2 teams together. But Jordan, I think, is a very up and down type of team. There are some visible flaws in this team. For example, they played so well against Malaysia, and then they played so well in the first half against South Korea. But I think that once the second half started, whether it was a conscious decision from their manager or it was they were just simply too tired, they did not defend their lead very well. They were holding on by their fingernails, and South Korea was eventually able to score an equalizer there. And then they lost in their final group game to Bahrain. It was a very, very dismal performance from them. Again, they look very tired and very fatigued, which is understandable considering how well they played in their previous 2 matches, but still it was a very meek performance. And then Bahrain was able to beat them and then top the group, and Jordan went from being top of the group to being in 3rd place. It actually turned out pretty well, though, because Bahrain had to go play Japan in the next round, whereas Jordan had to play Iraq, which looked like a pretty sure result. When you look at the form of these 2 teams heading into that match up between each other, Iraq was in much better form. But I think Iraq actually went into that game with a little bit of arrogance in them, because they had played so well in the group stage. They expected to easily beat Jordan, considering how, I guess disappointing Jordan was against Bahrain. But the complete opposite happened. Jordan went full throttle. They showed respect to their opponents, of course, but they showed no fear. But that game was very controversial in the fact that, while Jordan did score first, they capitalized on a defensive error. Iraq kind of awoke after that, and they scored an equalizer and then scored a deserved second goal to go into the lead. But after that goal from Ayman Hussein, he went and did a extravagant goal celebration. He got sent off because he got a double yellow for that. He already had an existing yellow. And then that red card, which was a very controversial red card, a red card that I personally don't think should have been given, completely changed the complexion of the match. Of course, Iraq was then a man down. And then Jordan was able to push forward, and just with 2 goals in essentially 2 minutes, they scored an equalizer, and then they scored a winner in stoppage time. A crazy game. One of the best games, if not the best game of the tournament. I highly recommend watching it if you have not. But because of that absolute chaos at the end, Jordan was able to go through. And then they played Tajikistan in the quarterfinals. And, big respect to Tajikistan for making it this far. It's their first ever Asian Cup. But they're one of the weaker opponents that you could possibly face once you get to this stage in the tournament. And it's not to say that they were pushovers, because they did push Jordan all the way, but still, Jordan was very much the better team, and then they find themselves here against South Korea. But, you know, I think Jordan do have some very visible flaws in this team. It's not to say that they don't deserve to get this far. Obviously, they very much do. But I think that there are other teams that were better teams that just didn't get as lucky, or, you know, the ball just didn't roll their way, and then that's why they didn't find themselves in this spot as opposed to Jordan. Now, as for South Korea's run, yes, I talked all about how great this team is on paper. There's also these massive expectations. South Korea has not won an Asian Cup going back to the 1950s, despite having some of the best teams historically in Asia. They even made a semifinal of the World Cup in 2002, the first Asian country to do so. But that has not translated to silverware in the Asian Cup. They have gotten close, of course. In 2015, they made it to the final, but they lost to the host, Australia. In this tournament here, they started off with a good win over Bahrain. Not a perfect victory, but South Korea was a better team. They had the game against Jordan, which we'll talk more about in a little bit, which they eventually tied 2-2. And then they had that crazy draw against Malaysia in their third game of the group stage, where they were playing so much better. They had so much more of the possession, so many more chances, but they just weren't clinical enough. They scored first, but then Malaysia was able to grab an equalizer. And then out of nowhere, Malaysia then was able to score a second goal to go into the lead. Now, South Korea was able to score a second equalizer and then a third goal to go into the lead. And just when it looked like the victory was guaranteed, Malaysia scored yet another equalizer to tie it 3-3. Another one of these crazy games. I highly recommend watching it if you have not. But it just shows this lack of composure within this South Korean team. They cannot hold on to leads very well, very confidently. Sometimes just a momentary lapse of concentration leads to a goal here. Into the round of 16, they had yet another hard-fought victory against Saudi Arabia. I think that the Saudis were actually the better team throughout the first half, and then maybe majority of the second half. They scored first. They had a bunch of chances. It looked very likely that the Saudis were going to go through at the expense of South Korea, but for whatever reason, the Saudis decided to really sit back and kind of invite Korea to attack, which they did, and they got closer and closer to scoring. They were knocking on the door, and eventually they did. Cho scored a header there off the bench. It was tied 1-1, and then I think in extra time, South Korea had much more of the momentum. They had some really close chances. Not to say that the Saudis didn't have chances themselves, but no one was able to break the deadlock from that point on. It went to penalties, and South Korea went through with Woo, the goalkeeper, having a wonderful performance there, leading them to their last game, the quarterfinal against Australia, which was, I think, a game that is a very blatant example of what can happen in tournament football. I think Australia was the better team throughout the majority of the game. They bossed the first half there. South Korea did have a few chances there, especially on the counter, but Australia just looked so much more confident on the ball. They were much more dynamic. They were tearing apart the South Korean defense, opening up channels here and there. They eventually scored the opening goal, a good goal from Goodwin, just showing like the late runners into the box, how creative the Australian attack can be. But they weren't clinical enough. They did create a host of chances into the second half. They didn't capitalize upon them. And the one thing about this Australia team is that they are in a transitionary phase, so a lot of the veterans were left out. There's a lot of younger guys in the team, and they didn't have a lot of experience, of course. That's why they're in this tournament, to build that experience. And because of that lack of experience, they did give away some silly mistakes, some silly defensive mistakes, which led to a penalty there. South Korea scored with only a few minutes left. Then heading into extra time, it was almost a repeat of the last game where they had more of the momentum. They had so many more chances, and then Hung Sung-min stepped up and scored a beautiful free kick, one of the best free kicks one of the best goals of this tournament. And I think only one of two free kicks, I believe. The only other one was the one Tajikistan scored against Lebanon. So deserved winner there. I think in the extra time period there, South Korea was a better team, but throughout the majority of the match, Australia was better. And if you just feel if they had a little bit more experience, they would be the ones here playing Jordan. But if you look at these two teams up against each other, I think a good example is the game that we already saw between these two, that 2-2 draw between these two teams here in the group stage. And this was a match where South Korea looked a little lethargic. They looked a little slow. They started off this game in that manner, which is funny because it seems they start off every game in that manner, perhaps the only exception being their opener against Bahrain. South Korea did score first against a run of play, but then from that moment on, Jordan was just kicked into overdrive. They had chance after chance after chance. They really came out and just punched South Korea right in the nose. They were shell-shocked. They scored a goal, and then in a very quick succession, they scored a second goal. A beautiful volley there. But then, like I said before, they kind of took their foot off the gas, whether that was intentional because they just wanted to conserve energy and protect their lead, or if they just couldn't handle the pressure because they were so fatigued from how great their performances in the first half. Either way, South Korea was able to get back into the match. And although it took a long time, they eventually did score the equalizer there with only a few minutes left. Jordan, you could say, was the better team, but you can't discredit how good South Korea was in the second half there. I think the match here in this semifinals is going to pan out pretty similarly. I don't think that either of these teams are that, let's say, tactically experienced to be able to play any other style. Both of these teams just play the same exact way, no matter the opponent, no matter the context of the game. Jordan, like I said, going forward are super dangerous, whether it be a guy like Olwan or a guy like Altamari, who plays for Montpellier in Ligue 1, is having a great season, is also having a great tournament here. They are super dangerous in attack, but they're a bit streaky sometimes, like whether it be for a majority of the game, like the game against Bahrain where they were pretty poor, or a game like the one against South Korea where they were amazing for maybe 30 minutes, and then for the rest of the game going forward, they had a few chances here and there, but it wasn't as electric, it wasn't as, powerful as it was previously. And then defensively, they give away a lot of silly mistakes. There's a lot of just, lapses of concentration, things like that. It's very funny, though, because South Korea is similar in that manner. I don't think it's as much of a clear dichotomy between such a great attack and a bit of a leaky defense. I think that South Korea has a little bit of both. Of course, they have amazing defenders like Kim Min-jae, who probably is the best defender in this tournament. But again, like I talked about already with the game against Jordan, or the game against Malaysia, or South Korea against Saudi Arabia, or South Korea against Australia, they give away silly mistakes. They haven't kept a single clean sheet throughout this tournament. But going forward, you can't look past some of these super talented guys like Lee Kang-in, or Cho, or of course Heung-min Son. Like, there's so many talented players here that it's hard to discredit them. You're expecting them to score goals, but at the same time you expect them to concede some goals. So I expect this to be a very high scoring affair, and I'm going to say that this match is going to finish 3-2 in favor of South Korea. I think it's going to be super tight. I think it's going to go down to extra time after being tied. I think, maybe this time Jordan will score first and South Korea will fight back, but then Jordan will score again. And then it's just going to be, toe-to-toe, and it's going to be a moment of brilliance that settles the match. And of course, South Korea have much more of that top echelon of talent. So I think that's going to push them over the edge there. So I'm saying 3-2 South Korea. Now, next up, we have the other semifinal. We have Iran versus Qatar. This is a game that I'm really looking forward to, and this is a game that I think we're going to see a really exciting game here, a really interesting game. It'll be super fascinating to see how these two teams line up against each other. Both have had very different paths going into this semifinal stage right here. I think both these teams are very much deserving of their spot here. I think these are two of the best teams throughout the tournament. Though I have to admit, I think Iran is in much better form than Qatar. But, of course, Qatar is the home nation. Not only are they the home nation, they are also the defending champions as well. As for Qatar, they had a relatively easy group with Lebanon, China, and Tajikistan. I think that they had a really good performance against Lebanon in the opening match of this tournament. They completely tore them apart, blew them out of the water. Very, very professional victory there. The next two wins were both very close 1-0 wins over both Tajikistan and China. I think that Qatar was the better team in both of those games, but they were pushed all the way. Now, part of that is because the manager, Tintin Lopez, decided to mess with the formation, switch it up a little bit, which created this kind of absence of consistency, I think. Into the round of 16, though, Qatar went into it without conceding a single goal. So I think that many people were expecting them to have this almost impervious defense. And that really wasn't the case from the knockout stage on. They played Palestine, and of course, there's a massive talent gap between Qatar and Palestine, but Palestine had so much drive, so much determination, and so much just passionate aggression going forward, and they really shocked Qatar there. They were able to score, capitalize on a defensive mistake, and Qatar was forced to play from behind, to come back from behind, which they did. I think that that goal kind of awoke them. They had a lot more talent going forward. Things just started to click. They eventually scored 2 goals in quick succession, one right before halftime, one right after the second half started. And then they were able to basically shut up shop and stop the Palestinians from creating any more chances. Professional victory there in the second half at least, but still some flaws to focus on in the first half. Very similar story against Uzbekistan, where in the quarterfinals there, Qatar, I think, actually started off on the front foot. They had a lot of really good chances. They scored with a relatively lucky goal. But then from that moment on, Uzbekistan was the team on the front foot. They had so many chances. The goalkeeper, Barsham, was forced into making a bunch of saves. And it eventually went to extra time, and it was still tied. After that, it went to penalties. And then Barsham stepped up with 2 wonderful saves. And then Qatar ended up going through, and they meet Iran right here in the semifinals. And then Iran, I think, has had a much more of a, up and down tournament in terms of the individual games. But while they've had some low moments, maybe some lower moments than Qatar, their highs that they've reached are much higher than Qatar. For example, their opening match against Palestine, I think at this point, from minute 1 to minute 90, probably their best overall performance that we've seen. They beat Palestine 4-1. They scored a goal within the first, I believe it was 2 minutes of the match. Their win never looked in doubt. It was just a very professional performance. It was a very impressive performance from all aspects of the pitch, all areas of the pitch. But then their next game against Hong Kong, I have to be honest, probably was a better team, at least in the first half, and they were just really unlucky not to score. Hong Kong is a team with virtually no experience in the Asian Cup. The last time they played was in this tournament was in the 50s. And, they really shocked Iran there. Iran was able to capitalize on one of the few chances that they did create. Just with the amount of talented players, you're inevitably going to get chances like that, which they scored, and then they held on to that lead. But there's some alarm bells ringing there. In the next match against UAE, I think Qatar was by far the better team throughout maybe the first 70 minutes. They, negatively were affected by some poor refereeing decisions. They had 2 goals rolled off. One of them I think was clearly, ruled off correctly, but the other one, though, kind of 50-50. And then UAE had a late flurry of chances. They scored a goal back and ended up finishing 2-1 in favor of Iran. But, a little troubling at the end there from UAE. And then against Syria in the round of 16, that game went down to the wire. I think ultimately Iran was the better team, but Syria did not give up. Syria had so much passion and so much determination going forward for them. And despite going down a goal, Syria did fight and was able to get a goal back. They tied it 1-1. There was a bit of a craziness there. Mehdi Taremi got sent off, and some of the Iranian players were just so tired. They were limping on the field. They were, guys were falling over, and Syria had some really close chances there at the end just because they had more gas in the tank. Eventually, though, they were not able to score. They go to penalties, and then Iran won. And then against Japan in the quarterfinals, though, this was a crazy game. Heavyweight matchup between 2 titans here. The first half is pretty close, but I think Japan was ultimately the better team. They were able to score a little bit against the run of play, not necessarily because Iran had all the chances, but it was just neither team really had a host of chances. But then in the second half, though, one of the best performances that you'll see of any team in this tournament here. Just the entirety of the second half, they were able to make up for their, I guess you could say, disappointing performance in the first half. Iran completely bossed the game. They played Japan off the pitch, whether it be a guy like Jahanbash or Mohebi or Azmoun. All three of those guys had wonderful games, but it wasn't just those three. The entire team was great going forward. They restricted Japan. Japan barely had any chances versus Iran was going nuts. They had so many shots going forward. They eventually did score an equalizer there, a beautiful move from Azmoun and a great finish from Mohebi. But they wouldn't find the winner up until literally the last kick of the game. A bit of a defensive mishap led to a penalty, which Jahanbash was able to score. But if not for that goal, Iran still had so many other chances. And when you look at these two teams, you compare them against each other. Like I said, Iran has had some poor moments, like the game against Hong Kong, or some of the goals that they've conceded. The first half against Japan, you could say, but the moments where they really click into form, where they're everything's going, everything's clicking together, everything's gelling together, they look better than every single other team in this tournament. Versus Qatar, I think that Qatar really hasn't been tested, if I'm being honest. Every single one of the opponents that they played has not really been comparable in size. Like I said, they went throughout their entire group stage without conceding a goal, but they went up against some of the worst teams in terms of attacking output. Lebanon has essentially nothing going for it, as I've said in previous videos here. China, probably even worse. And then Tajikistan, they're really punching above their weight. They were able to fight and score some goals eventually, but even still, they did have a goal that was ruled off for being offside, which again, another controversy there. And then in the knockout stage, going up against Palestine, another team that doesn't have a whole lot going forward, but they still were able to score. And then Uzbekistan is a very talented team going forward, and if not for Barsham, this could be Uzbekistan we're talking about in the semifinals here. So I think Qatar has had a relatively safe path up until this point. And that's not to say they don't deserve their path, or they don't deserve their place here, because you got to play just who's in front of you, and Qatar has been the better team in each one of these games. But you could just compare that to Iran. Like, yes, Iran has had some very weak opponents, like say Hong Kong, but they went up against Syria, a very tough team, and then they went up against Japan, most of the people's favorites heading into this tournament, and they beat them deservedly. So I think just Iran has been tested more. I think also, if you look at this Qatari team, I think they're being carried very much so by Akram Afif. This team that had the spark, they had such a electric spark about them in 2019. They blew teams off the map. Yes, Qatar has won as many games up until this point as they did in 2019, but the results aren't the same. Back in 2019, we're talking about 6-0, 4-0, a bunch of 2-0s there. They're just dumping goals on teams. Very different than now. Akram Afif has been stepping up and dragging his team forward. He is essentially I think the sole player going forward that is creating all these chances. And it's not just him, of course. There's Hassan Al Haidos has popped up with a few goals, but a guy like Almoez Ali hasn't been as clinical as he was technically 5 years ago. Compare the two Iran, and as I was saying, Mehdi Taremi is going to be back from suspension, but even if he wasn't, look how good they played against Japan. Just the team effort that they have. I'm heavily leaning towards Iran going forward, going to the final and surpassing against Qatar. In terms of a match prediction here, in terms of a score, I think that it's going to be 2-1. Qatar is going to be a very tough opponent, but at the end of the day, I think that Iran is the better team. I'm going to say that Mehdi Taremi grabs a goal. I'm going to say that he's going to grab the winner, maybe in extra time. Like I said, 2-1. He's going to grab the winner there. I think he's going to be motivated because he's probably going to be a little ticked off that he missed that great game against Japan because of his silly suspension that he got in the round of 16 here. So, in summary, I'm saying South Korea and Iran are going to be the two teams going forward to meet each other in the final. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think is going to happen in these two matches here. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Of course, I've brought forth some hot takes, so feel free to disagree. But type all your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Share this video with a friend. Don't forget to follow the Football Bloc on social media. But anyway, guys, I will see you later, and I hope you have a nice rest of your night.
One step beyond.